Okay, it is 12:30 on the dot, and so we are going to start on time. We have a lot of information to share with you today, and we are so thankful to see so many people in this breakout session. So thank you all for joining us. In January of 2020, Director Strickler signed the Transportation Leaders Against Human Trafficking Pledge. The pledge includes a commitment to work together within the transportation industry to educate our employees and organizational members on how to recognize and report signs of human trafficking, how to raise awareness amongst the traveling public, and measure our collective efforts towards combating these serious crimes and violation of human rights. Human trafficking involves the transportation of people to exploit them in forced labor, domestic servitude, and sexual exploitation. Human trafficking should be viewed as a problem of inequality and structural marginalization. Individuals that are targeted are often part of populations made vulnerable through economic injustice, racial or ethnic oppression, gender discrimination, or any number of oppressions. Human trafficking is happening now in all 50 states, and it is a problem worldwide. This isn't just a law enforcement issue, but a social justice issue. While many individuals who are trafficked are in the sex trades, some are working in legitimate businesses such as rest areas, restaurants, hotels, and more. We, as employees of ODOT, are invaluable resources, and we are in a unique position to help combat human trafficking, which is happening today on our roads. I was first introduced to the Truckers Against Trafficking in 2015 at a registration and tax conference. I was inspired by the story of a survivor and the truck driver who saved her life. And as a result, we are now requiring training for our staff on the roadside. Today, we want to raise awareness amongst our peers in support of our pledge and highlight the efforts of our panel members. I'll turn this over to Mary Dirksen, and she is going to lead our team as they discuss their unique efforts to raise awareness and combat human trafficking.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I just want to say thank you for being that leadership voice that's never given up on keeping this topic alive at ODOT. So I've appreciated partnering with you, and thank you so much. I know we're supposed to say where we want to go in Oregon, and while we're a panel member, and I guess the place I want to go is a little beach house in Nehalem that I love, and I would get there before 8 p.m. on Highway 26, so I didn't have to hit the night paving operation, which is actually looking really great though. So we don't have a ton of time, as Amy said, for the session. We have several folks sharing today, so we're going to just get right into it. We plan to use the extra 15 minutes we have for a Q&A session at the end, or likely might use it for additional time for presenters if needed. But we're so honored that you're here today and you've chosen this session, and we understand it's a very heavy topic. And perhaps some of you might be wondering why this might be a topic at ODOT Fall Forum. And as Amy mentioned, there's a definition of human trafficking that includes the word transportation in it. And traffickers use our roadways to traffic their victims. Many DOTs have recognized this for quite some time. And so based on that, 49 out of 50 state DOTs have signed the Transportation Leaders Against Human Trafficking Pledge. I'm going to share just a little bit about my involvement. And in 2017, I was selected as a panel member for the National Cooperative Highway Research Program for a brand new project at that time. And the title is really long, so bear with me. It's the State DOT Contributions to the Study, Investigation, and Interdiction of Human Trafficking. And this project is actually still ongoing in a second phase. And the purpose is to create a suite of materials that's going to help all state DOTs in the United States be trained on and assist in the fight against human trafficking. This is going to impact and help ODOT when the project is completed, as we, along with all state DOTs, will have a consistent suite of tools available to use in combating human trafficking. And the tools will be survivor-informed policy governance, training, instructional aids, and operational tools. Also in 2017, I joined the statewide Oregon DOJ Trafficking Intervention Advisory Committee, which is how I met JR, who I'll be introducing here in a minute. On this committee, I represent ODOT in the statewide effort to combat human trafficking. Our role at ODOT in the fight against human trafficking looks different than other state agencies and other entities in the state. since we're not law enforcement, we don't arrest anybody, and we don't provide services for survivors of human trafficking. But we do have eyes on the road, and we have the ability to observe and report information so folks like JR can do something about it. I'm excited to share more about the statewide committee with anybody who's interested and learning more about that, as well as the NCHRP project. And if anybody has any topics they want me to bring up at the statewide committee, please shoot me an email or call me. Now I'm honored, and it's my privilege to introduce JR Ujifusa here today. JR has been working on human trafficking crimes and issues for the last 12 years and is a special assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Oregon, focusing on federal human trafficking crimes. He's the senior deputy and supervisor of the Multnomah County District Attorney's Drug and Property Unit and Human Trafficking Team, which oversees, among other things, commercial sexual exploitation of children, law enforcement group, and he's also the primary prosecutor for all human trafficking cases within Multnomah County. JR has trained, presented, and has been a guest speaker at numerous national and regional human trafficking conferences and trainings. He's a member of the Multnomah County and State of Oregon Human Trafficking Task Force, and he serves as the chair of the National Advisory Committee on Sex Trafficking of Children and Youth in the United States. He co-chairs the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys Human Trafficking Advisory Committee, and he also co-chairs the Oregon DOJ Trafficking Intervention Advisory Committee, which is how I met him. And as you can hear and see, he works tirelessly in the fight against human trafficking, and we're so lucky to have him share with us today. JR, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Can everyone hear me okay? Is the audio and video working fine? Okay, great. Hey, Mary, thank you for that introduction, and the words before that were very appropriate. I know we have a very limited time, so I'm going to first start by the question of where would I like to be if anywhere in Oregon. I spent a lot of time on the Owyhee River fly fishing with usually my dad, which is in the southeast corner outside of Nyssa, Oregon. So that would have to be my place if I were to be somewhere right now. Actually, I was there last weekend. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about, thank you all for being here. I think it's amazing to have so many individuals learning about trafficking for the simple principle that many of you will be jurors, you'll be neighbors, you'll be friends, you'll be community members, as well as what you do in your job. So I thought I'll take the next 10 to 15 minutes to talk about what I think would be the biggest points that I can get across to people in a short amount of time. You know, human trafficking, you can do a 3-day conference on and not hit everything, but I'll try to be quick and brief, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions that I can follow up with you. So I want to first talk about the dynamics and indicators of trafficking, because I think there's a lot of misnomers about that. First of all, let's talk about victims of trafficking. While it is true that many victims of trafficking are vulnerable individuals who are runaways, foster kids, things of that nature, what I've seen in the last now, it's almost 13 years of working trafficking cases, is that the common denominator with most victims is a low self-esteem. And the reason that is the most common denominator is we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about sort of the way in which traffickers get victims to do this. But if you can imagine a teenage young woman, which is the majority of the victims in our cases, although of course there are male victims and trans victims as well. If you can imagine those individuals, there aren't too many teenagers that don't have some self-esteem issues. And so unfortunately, the group of individuals who could be vulnerable victims is gigantic. But those vulnerabilities are exploited by traffickers in a way that I don't think Hollywood or maybe some stories you've heard really get to the point of what trafficking is. The vast majority of traffickers and trafficking cases in Oregon and in this nation are actual domestic victims. They're victims from your neighborhoods. They're victims from adjoining neighborhoods. They're victims that go to high school with your kids, that go to church with you, that live down the street. And because of that, there's a huge misnomer about what actually is required for trafficking cases and laws. We don't need someone to cross country lines, state lines, county lines in order for it to be a trafficking case. So a little bit about our victims. There have been some studies out in Oregon. I'm going to refer to two very quickly. One was, I believe, in 2014 from PSU. And in PSU, they found almost 500 individual victims of trafficking that were minors in 4 years' time. Those 500 victims were overrepresented in people of color. They were vastly females, and the average age was around 15. So when we think about being able to identify a trafficking victim and their average age is 15, it holds true that the average age of most victims is somewhere around, when they get into the life of trafficking, between 13 and 14 years old. The youngest one in that study was 8 years old, and the youngest trafficking victim I've seen is 11. And so I just want to give you a clear picture that we have a range from 8 years old and to, of course, all the way to, of course, adults who can be trafficked as well. I want to talk a little bit about traffickers as I'm trying to move quickly. Traffickers can be male, female, transgendered. They can be wealthy, poor, any race, any socioeconomic class. What we see is the common denominator in traffickers is they're actually very smart. They're clever, they're charismatic, they're thoughtful about their crime, and they usually are pretty well spoken. And so what we see with traffickers is they have the uncanny ability to identify vulnerabilities in their victims, sometimes before they even actually have a conversation with their victims. I'll give you an example. There's a study done, I believe it was out of Chicago, where a whole bunch of traffickers serving prison sentences were interviewed about how they identified their victims. And some traffickers talked about they didn't even have to talk to their victims. They could observe how their victims interacted with people around them. And just by that, just by those cues, they could tell those victims who had self-esteem issues or didn't have a good home life or didn't have a place to go that night. So what we see from traffickers is they're not going to pick on the anyone except sort of what we would call the low-hanging fruit, individuals that they think that they can manipulate and control in order to get them to do what they want. And so what we normally see is traffickers acting like boyfriends. That's the dynamic we normally see between traffickers and victims. I'll give you sort of an example of how that works and the reasons why we see that and why that's so advantageous to traffickers. If I'll sort of quote a case, I guess I'll tell it in story format. I'm a 14-year-old female who has run away from home because I'm unhappy with how my parents have been treating me. And I'm at a bus stop at 2 a.m. Now, it's a Wednesday, and so there aren't many people out at 2 a.m. at a bus stop in downtown Portland. But the car starts to circle me. And that car is driven by a 45-year-old man who is extremely kind. And he asked me what I'm doing, asked me if I need food, asked me if I need a place to stay. And soon I get in a car with him and I go to his place and he talks about how much he loves his nieces and nephews. He talks about, he's trying to get back on his feet from, just getting out of prison. And he provides food and shelter. And really, it's just a kind individual. And he provides that 14-year-old with things they don't have. He takes them out to dinner. He buys them nice clothes. He takes them out to meals. And he listens. That's a really important part about traffickers. They're fantastic listeners. And so he listens to my concerns. He listens to the problems at home. He listens to my hopes and my dreams. And soon he starts telling me that I can attain whatever those dreams are. For my 14-year-old, it was, right? It was being a mom and having a nice house and driving a nice car, those sorts of things. And so these traffickers or this individual listened intently and slowly started to expand boundaries. I call it gradually expanding boundaries. It's what we see often. When people start to think, how do you get a young woman who hasn't been involved in any of this to go from sort of an innocent 14-year-old to being posted online and engaging in sexual acts with strangers? It's a gradual expansion of boundaries. So in this case, I start drinking alcohol with this man, and he's very loving and kind and listens to me and treats me like an adult and tells me how mature I am. Soon we start smoking weed. Soon we start doing harder drugs. And then he starts taking me to strip clubs. And he's showing me off to people and taking me out to eat and buying me new dresses every time we go. And I just feel super confident. I feel like I'm loved. I feel like I'm mature and I'm being respected. And then one night, that individual says to me, "Hey, see those girls dancing? You could do that. You're much prettier than those girls. You could go that and you could get some money and we could even have some more fun." So soon I start dancing. And soon after, he's showing me pornography and engaging in sexual acts with me. And then he starts to say, "Hey, you're making a good amount of money dancing, but you can make a lot more money if I just posted your pictures on the internet and you could just meet people here or meet people at a hotel. You could put a zero at the end of whatever you're making as a dancer, and you could pick who you wanted and nothing would ever bad. I'd be right around the corner and I'd make sure these people are safe." And so you can see it went from having a place to stay and running away to feeling loved, to feeling appreciated, to feeling mature, to slowly, gradually expanding my boundaries to sexual acts with strangers. What happens in that dynamic is there's what's called a trauma bond. And I'm sure some of you have heard of that. But what that is that's a bond that now this 14-year-old shares with this older man, that they feel like they love them. They feel like this person cares for them and they don't want to see anything bad happen to them. If I'm a trafficker, that's exactly what I want to have happen. It insulates me from law enforcement because I know that that victim's never going to tell on me. She loves me. She doesn't want to see me in trouble. She knows that I've cared for her, that I've spent money on her, all sorts of stuff. Even if I start to get violent or start to get angry, I know that she's isolated from everyone around her. I'm the person she relies on for food and housing and all that sort of thing. And she's not going to tell on me. And so what we see is the same sort of trauma bond we would see in almost like a domestic violence situation, where victims of domestic violence are afraid to leave, but they also have this feeling of love for those individuals who may be abusing them. And so with that dynamic, when you come across an individual who's a victim with their trafficker, they're not going to be chained up. They're not going to be in a cage. They're not going to be trying to look to escape every minute. They actually think that they're in a relationship, because the relationships they may have had and what have made them vulnerable are relationships that have abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, mental abuse, whether it's relationships where they didn't have a father figure or people didn't treat them right. And so they believe this is a healthy relationship. And so you can see why we don't have victims calling 911 saying they're the victims of trafficking. You can see why they don't flag down people to say, "Hey, I'm being trafficked," in most cases. What happens is they're being trafficked, and many times these traffickers are so good, they actually convince their victims that it was their idea, that they wanted to do this. And so the challenge for law enforcement and for prosecutors is to break down those barriers, to identify these victims and these traffickers. And I should add, I don't want to forget these buyers, these men who purchase these minors, who add to the demand, is to identify them and hold them accountable. And so the way we can do that is to rely on all different types of people who come in contact with these individuals in their personal life, in their work life, throughout the state, to identify some of the indicators. And so some of the indicators I think of, if I'm going to think about what I would do if I was a trafficker, is sort of that control and manipulation. Most of our victims have to ask when to eat, when to sleep, where to go. They always have to report what they're doing, how much money they're making, how long they're going to be with someone who's purchased them. And so some of the indicators you may see are that control. Sometimes they aren't able to carry money or their ID or anything like that, so that they're completely dependent on their trafficker. Some other things we see, although when I talk about indicators, not one indicator alone is going to, of course, guarantee it's trafficking, but we see a lot of difference in age. So like I said, this 14-year-old young woman was with a 45-year-old man. We see a gap in age usually where traffickers are older than their victims. And so sometimes that sticks out. I had a case that came out of California where two people were eating at a diner, and there was a man who looked like he was with his daughter, except the couple who was at the diner noticed that they were sort of acting in a romantic way. And they called the state police in California. California identified these two people, but ultimately couldn't do anything. There was no crimes they committed at that point. The victim had a false ID that made her look like she was 18. But ultimately, that couple broke open this case for a trafficking case in which this man actually purchased this woman from her mother, this minor from her mother, for about $8,000 and was trafficking her in Portland. And so there are things that I guess I would say just don't feel right, just stick out as that's not a healthy relationship. That individual or those individuals don't seem like they are on the same power differential. One seems to be really in control of the other. That's part of what I would say. Of course, I tell law enforcement and other people, odd ways of getting money, photographs on phones that seem to be sexual in nature, burner phones or additional phones, traveling from hotel to hotel, motel to motel, apartment to apartment. Those are all things we look for as well. But I'm trying to think of things that you may see in your work, and that dynamic is really important. I know I only have a couple more minutes. I want to talk a little bit about the laws and then what we can do being proactive. So under state law in Oregon, anyone who aids or facilitates a prostitution act or receives money from a prostitution act can be prosecuted under promoting prostitution, which is a felony, and you have to register as a sex offender. The next step up from that is a mandatory prison sentence for anyone who aids or facilitates a prostitution act of a minor or uses force or intimidation towards an adult to make them engage in prostitution. That's called compelling prostitution, and that's a mandatory minimum of 70 months prison. In federal laws, 1591 is the sex trafficking of an individual, and that's a force, fraud, or coercion is sort of the name they give it, unless it's a minor. And if it's a minor, they just have to sort of aid or facilitate that minor, and that would be a federal crime. Federal crimes and state crimes overlap a ton, and so that's why I do both federal prosecution and state prosecution. Sort of to end this, because I'm almost at about 15 minutes, I want to talk a little bit about what I see on travel, and that is traffickers in Portland, where I'm at, don't stay in Portland. They travel to Bend, they travel to Roseburg, they travel to Baker City, they travel to La Grande, they travel up and down the I-5 corridor and 84, they go to truck stops, they take their victims all sorts of places, because isolating victims both physically and socially from other individuals makes them rely on their trafficker. We are part of what's called the West Circuit, and so our traffickers also rotate between Idaho, Utah, Nevada, California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii, and we will actually track advertisements online all over the place. And because prostitution has moved from online from street level prostitution to mostly online, it is almost exclusively travel for both the buyer and the trafficker, because they are traveling either to motels or to homes or to apartments to engage in sex acts. And so what we see is with the increase of internet prostitution activity and trafficking, there is a huge amount of travel. In fact, one of the studies I saw stated that about 40% of the buyers in Portland are from outside of Multnomah County. So they're coming from Clackamas County, Washington County, Marion County, and a lot of them are coming actually from the state of Washington. So the positive impact ODOT can have is not only being aware of this, but also being on the lookout. Because the way cases come to the DA's office is through third parties. It's through that couple at the diner who sees something that doesn't seem right. It's through the person at a rest stop who notices that there's this dynamic going on, or this young woman who doesn't look taken care of with this older individual who doesn't look like their father. It's someone, observing something on the road that looks like that person's in trouble or being controlled, or traveling to and from locations that a minor shouldn't be traveling to. So adult clubs, motels and hotels over and over again. So I know ODOT expands all throughout the travel industry. And I know many of you may say, yeah, but I may not come in contact with that, those individuals under that situation. But there are many ways in which I think you'll come in contact with these individuals. And because of the dynamics, we rely fully on proactive identification and reporting to do that. So how do you report real quickly? Anything would be helpful. License plates, descriptions, names, types of vehicles. and then to call the hotline, the sex trafficking hotline. That hotline actually gets patched through to the local law enforcement, and it's assigned to an FBI agent or a detective in that area to help. A description of the dynamics you saw, what sort of made it stick out to you, sort of the relationship between those two is also very helpful. And being willing to be a witness in case they have some follow-up questions is sort of the first step in really helping out. Being a part of the solution and helping us identify traffickers and victims, or if we've already identified them, being able to then track or find them. Many times we know victims who are being trafficked, but they're runaways. They're in the wind, or they're in another state, or they're living out of their car with their trafficker. So anyway, I don't want to take too much time. I know that was a quick summary of a lot of things we see, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end if we have time. But thank you for your time and allowing me to speak today.
Thank you so much, JR. We so appreciate all that you shared in your time today. I'm going to really quickly go to, I know somebody had mentioned what can ODOT do, and actually we're going to talk about that here with our next two folks. And so Maureen McNeil is up, and she works in the Commerce and Compliance Division, and she's going to share what she's been doing in her section to help in the fight against human trafficking at ODOT. So Maureen, go ahead, and I'll try to share your slides.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Maureen McNeil, and I'm currently managing the Blue Mountain region for the CCD, and I work out of the Port of Entry here in Umatilla. I'm super excited to be here, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to answer that question. I don't know if you can see my background there, but if I could be anywhere in Oregon, then I would be in the Elkhorn Mountains, and my mode of transportation would be my friend there, Joey, and I probably have my fishing pole, maybe a couple of favorite beverages in the saddlebag. So anyway, one of my first things with chat, I attended a training in Bend just a few years back, and I continue to stay in contact with Kyla, the deputy director, and I receive their correspondence and their newsletters regularly. And since that training, it's just been something that stayed extremely close to my heart. In January this year, I started planning a special ops. Normally once or twice a year, we plan something here on the east side with our law enforcement partners, where we typically focus on one or two specific safety violations. Could be anywhere from bypassing issues to driving under the influence. It's just whatever we've seen that's we've seen a lot of. Now, prior to planning that op, I had a couple of incidences that just kind of occurred. I think it was early fall. I was home one evening, and I was scrolling through my phone, and I was reading the news, and I saw a video there. It was the Tri-City News, which is about 30 miles away from us. And they had a video, and it was a couple adult men, and they were in the mall, and they happened to be following a group of girls. And it was really apparent that they were trying to separate those girls. Maybe get one or two. They followed him into stores, and I'm not sure who was videoing, but obviously the whistle got blown, and unfortunately those two gentlemen did get away, but fortunately the girls were safe. And the article did say that perhaps they were part of a trafficking group. The next thing that happened shortly after that, and it's just like a series there, was I was working at the port, and we had a gentleman drive in a passenger vehicle, and they wanted to speak to a supervisor. So I went out and spoke to him. The English was a little broken, so we had a little bit of a language barrier there. But from what I gathered from his story, I'm not sure if it was a relative or just people that he was concerned about, but it appeared that folks had been brought from somewhere, and they were promised a job driving, and they were housed together, and from what I gathered, the conditions of the housing was not very good. And apparently they had paid to get here. And they thought they were going to get this great driving job and start their new lives here. But apparently they weren't done paying. They had to continue to work basically for free. And their pay was given to whoever brought them up. So the gentleman was frightened to go to the police or law enforcement. So I listened to his story, and I tried to point him in another direction through our safety division and maybe through our motor carrier through both federal and state. And I'm not entirely sure how that turned out, but I do hope that they were able to get some help for him. It was kind of one of those aha moments, you know, as JR said, kind of indicated. Trafficking it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate against gender or age or the town that it shows up in. It's everywhere. And it was my aha moment that, oh, hey, it's in my backyard. I not only possibly have a human trafficking issue, I've also got a labor trafficking issue here. So when I was planning the operation for this year, I knew instantly that somehow I needed to include TAT. And so I contacted them and made sure that I had copies of the most recent training videos and materials that they had to offer at the time. And I went through the safety division to see what else they would have. And then before I put it together, luckily, I work for Carla and Amy, and I got their blessing and moved forward. As Carla would say, go forth and conquer, Mo. So I did. And as you can look at the screen there, you can see that in June, we did a 44-hour special operation with law enforcement partners. And this year it was the Oregon State Police Commands out of Hermiston, Pendleton, LeGrand, Baker City, and Ontario. And prior to the operation, I made sure that both my folks, motor carrier, and their folks, the state troopers, had the latest training videos and encouraged them to view those before the operation. And of course, some of them had received some training, but refresher training is great. It brings everything right up to the forefront and makes you you're aware of it. So the 44-hour special operation in 2 locations, we weighed over 4,000 trucks, and we did over 200 enforcements and 168 inspections. You can do the math, but that's over 60 motor carrier and OSP officers that received current training. With every opportunity to interact with the commercial motor carrier drivers, we handed out the wallet cards with the 800 number on it. If they wish to engage in some conversation or get some more information, we were there to provide it. And then our continuing efforts. Currently, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of things. I haven't surprised my bosses with all the ideas I have. But here's what we're working on right now. We are working with DMV and their CDL program to include TAT wallet cards and education with every CDL issuance or renewal. We're planning on having TAT training for all of our new hires within the first year. I just got some supplies in today, and we'll be resupplying TAT materials to all the truck stops and offering training videos for any of their new employees. One of the main things we did this year, unfortunately, the COVID has kept us from having the lobbies open, but we did initiate a continuous TAT training video on our screens in our lobbies. So hopefully in January, we'll be able to open again, and those will be viewed by anybody that enters our lobbies. And we're just gonna, continue to provide education and awareness. We'll be adding the TAT link to our website as well. So that kind of wraps up what I did this year. I'd like to just share a couple other things if I have a little bit of time. I'm a grandmother. I've got 3 beautiful granddaughters, and my middle one, she just turned 8, Skylar. She is the apple of my eye. But ever since she's been able to talk, she will walk up to anybody and she will discuss any subject that you would like to discuss and debate. And I'm so very proud of her. But on the other hand, it scares the devil out of me. Because if any of you are out there that are parents or grandparents, children, they have a special power. It's kind of like a ninja power. And they can disappear in a nanosecond, believe me. So I encourage all of you to seek some extra training on this. Be aware. Go on to the TAT website. Go to YouTube. They've got many videos on there. Some of them are, parts of them are extremely heart-wrenching, but there is hope. I just can't say that enough. I was thinking late last night about, I'm going to try not to get emotional, so you have to excuse me, but I was thinking about all the tragedies in my life, but all the blessings too, and all the things that I can do to change the world and surrounding me, and things I'm capable of doing. And that's to bring positive change where we can, whether it's our home, our community, our work world. And if I can do it, I know you can too. One last thought I was thinking about, the old saying that it takes a village to raise a child. Today, I think it takes a community to protect one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. And just really quickly, everybody, TAT stands for Truckers Against Trafficking. It's a great organization that partners with Commerce and Compliance. And really quickly now, I want to introduce Jamie Baldwin from Public Transit, who has also another amazing and inspiring story about the work she's doing and has done. And Jamie's got about 8 minutes. But if folks want to stay on, we can definitely do some Q&A here. I know we haven't had a chance to really look at the chat. So Jamie, take it away, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I will make it quick. First place I want to go, I have not discovered Northeast Oregon that much. I'm someone who hops in my car and chooses my GPS to just stick with forest roads, stay off the paved streets. But I have not really gone up to the Northeast. So like Walla Lake, I'm thinking would be kind of cool to check out. All right, well, when it comes to human trafficking, my journey starts back in July of 2018. A couple of my buddies were talking about the training they had just received there in law enforcement, and they started telling me all about the human trafficking training that they had received. And obviously that's on my radar because I'm like, well, if they're getting trained on the subject, I should probably find out a little bit myself. So once I got past the mental block of actually typing the words human trafficking into my state computer and was able to do some research, I looked and I had to be a part of it. I realized how much they touch public transportation, how much like our transit centers are, welcome people who are, homeless or people who are down in their luck or, whatever it is, or young adults and things like that. Like some of them hang out around those vicinities. And so it's like, we need our people to be able to recognize what the red flags are. So anyone who knows me knows when I get an idea in my head and I'm passionate about it, I don't generally take no for an answer. So I run into the division administrator's office and basically to ask permission to pursue this training, kind of with the change the world energy. And I hopped up on my soapbox, and gave him a spiel. And the first thing he said was, do you coordinate trainings for public transportation agencies? What does this have to do with buses? And then I realized I totally skipped the part about, runaway youth, are a lot of times at transit centers and such. They're also shelters for homeless. It's convenient. It's for recruitment when it comes to traffickers. They utilize our systems for recruitment, for moving and controlling victims, for delivering victims to buyers. And we're on the I-5 corridor. We're on the I-5 corridor, and we have ports all along our shores for purchasing goods and services. And human trafficking is a good and service, unfortunately, is how it's viewed. So it started there. And then once I got his blessing and I hopped off my soapbox, I went on my way. I was able to meet with Annie Sovic, who is the director of Busing on the Lookout. That is a subsidy of Truckers Against Trafficking. And I was able to fly to Denver and talk to her about it, because I was just stopped flying to Denver anyway. So it worked out great. And I was able to go over and get all these different materials that we're able to pass out at different trainings. And then let me share. Okay. So this is what we did as human trafficking training. And it started in October 2018. And we were able to present at the Oregon Public Transportation Conference, and we had about a 60 in attendance. From there, in July of 2019, we incorporated human trafficking training to our grant management training, which is a required training for all of our transit agencies to attend. We had over 150 in attendance, and that was from 77 different agencies statewide. And that particular training, what we did is we did facilitator training. So it's like train the trainer. So we actually provided them with facilitator guides, because we weren't just training the people that were actually in the room. We wanted to give them the ability to train all of their transit agency staff and transit drivers and such, and teach them the red flags. We also provided them with posters for their buses. For the interior, we gave them wallet cards, we gave them stickers, we gave them all the things they could possibly need to be able to make sure that they, are able to keep this training going. So since then, I have received numerous different sign-ins and such of different trainings that they've done, and how it's all kind of come together. So we have trained hundreds and hundreds of people now at this point, just as a trickle effect. Most of our agencies trained their drivers within the first month after our initial training. So that is our story when it comes to public transportation. We are continuing on as we go through it, and we're trying to make sure that everybody is aware. I think the biggest thing for us is how many people, when you go to talk to them about it, they say, "Oh, well, that doesn't happen around here." And I think last week or the week before, there was a huge trafficking ring that was busted up in near Astoria, and you're not even thinking about those things. So it's definitely something that we should all be a part of, and it's definitely something that state dots can participate in, because we're everywhere. We're a huge force. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie. You guys really, you and Maureen both just inspire me, and I'm so grateful for all the work you've done. There's a question here that says, can there be some sort of department-wide campaign? We need to get the word out. And that is actually something Amy Ramsdale and I have been working on kind of behind the scenes for quite a while, and we'll continue to do that. Hopefully more to come on that. There's another question that says, how does Portland trafficking compare to other state jurisdictions? And that's one, perhaps, JR, I don't know if you have any information on that. Oh, you're on mute, JR.
Thank you. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I didn't bother other speakers. I'm very cautious about numbers, because we know very little. We know the tip of the iceberg. What I can say is this: Portland has always been known for a trafficking hub, especially in the western states. But any minor is too much. And what we're seeing is not only is metro areas growing, but we've done missions in Roseburg and smaller towns, Tillamook, and the demand is everywhere. And so I think it's growing enough everywhere that whether we rank second or 50th, it doesn't really matter, because there's way too much of it in our communities, for sure.
Thank you. I know we have like one more minute. I don't know if there's any other question in the chat, or if somebody wants to go off mute and ask. If anybody has any ideas about, any topics you want me to bring up at the statewide committee, any thoughts you have, I know there also could be other places at ODOT that are actually involved in doing things on this front. And if that's the case, please let us know so that we can partner with you and know, what other entities in ODOT are doing. So that would be really helpful, actually.
And Mary has my contact information. If we're done and you have other questions, please reach out to Mary and she can send you my contact information if you have additional questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think another question came up but I don't see it in my chat. Let's see. Somebody said, I'm in the trucking industry. It's statewide. Can we send an outreach to the truckers in the region? I don't know if you can answer that, Amy.
I can talk a little bit about what we're doing. Carla Phelps will be presenting at the Oregon Trucking Association Safety Conference to get information in the hands of truck drivers. OTA is a sponsor of Truckers Against Trafficking, and we will also be reaching out to other trucking industry lobby groups, but we have materials and information for truck drivers, as Maureen mentioned, that we're passing out. If you'd like to help us do that, we can get you the information. And there's videos, all sorts of things that we can do.
Yeah, and I think we already have an amazing connection. Maureen has offered to tour Jamie, and there's a partnership already in the works right now. So that's awesome. Thank you all so much. I know it's 1:16, so want to be respectful of everybody's time. JR, we are so grateful for your time today and your expertise and your incredible knowledge, not only in Oregon, but nationwide. And again, Jamie and Maureen, thank you so much for all that you're doing. And Amy, I can't say enough good things about you.
You too, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
We appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.
Bye.